was an important indication to me of the fragile nature of Afro-Colombian efforts to transform what citizenship means through social movements that demand recognition, rights, and equality. So one of the noticeable things of Latin American countries since the 1990s is a new description of what the countries are made up, which most are described as multicultural or pluriethnic, or even now some intercultural, and they're around ideas of citizenship. These new constitutions, through these new constitutions, a good number of Latin American countries, such as Colombia or Nicaragua, have totally declared themselves multicultural pluriethnic. It's a long list of countries, actually. The communities had mobilized over and fought and voted for these changes, these new constitutions in Latin America. And for the most part, they wanted it as citizens, demanding that the state recognition as citizens and equality. So I'm contrasting that to communities that had mobilized to be separate from the nation. It's a mobilization that says we want to be citizens and want to be recognized as citizens. Indigenous and Afro-Latin Americans might be described as having what Holston calls in Brazil a differentiated citizenship. By this he means a citizenship where formal membership in a nation is combined with unequal substantive distributions of rights, meanings, institutions, and practices that membership entails to those who are called citizens. In other words, it's a citizenship where everybody is included as a citizenship, but the distribution of rights and duties and resources are structured unevenly. So it's inherently unequal and perpetuates inequalities. So these new constitutions were trying to address this problem. And so today Colombia is often cited as an example of new ways of citizenship in being the way that citizenship is changing in Latin America because of the 1991 constitution that made the provision for collective territories for ethnic groups. And it's kind of unique, I mean, it's kind of important, sorry, I'm forgetting I have, I'm going to look at these two. It kind of came about in one way. The 1991 constitution gave the provision for making a separate law called Law 70 for the titling of land to Afro-Colombians. At the same time, the 1991 Constitution made provisions for the extending of territories for indigenous people. So Law 70 built a number of institutions to govern Afro-Colombian rights. It ties the recognition of Afro-Colombians to ethnicity. So you were recognized as an ethnic group, and that recognition was tied to your possibility of getting territory. So ethnicity and territory. And it resulted in the largest amount of land transferred to people of African descent of any country in the Americas. So it's about 4% of the national territory, or 4.7 million hectares of land to people, titled as collective property to people of African descent. It's quite a lot smaller than what was titled to indigenous people, which is about 24% of the national territory, but it's still way beyond anything titled in any other country of the Americas. At the same, since 1996, the Constitutional Court ruling, the T422, Tutela 422, was a ruling about Afro-Colombian citizenship equality that provided for the possibility of affirmative action measures for Colombian populations that depends on a different type of recognition. It recognized Afro-Colombians not as an ethnic group, but as a marginalized racial group. So it recognized them as people who had been discriminated against. And the ruling that declares that because of historical marginalization, Afro-Colombians have not been equal citizens, and therefore have a right to affirmative action measures, so some kind of way of ameliorating that problem. There's also the demands for affirmative action increased with the World Conference against racism, discrimination, xenophobia, and related intolerances in Durban in 2000. I think it's 2001. And a number of some national and city development plans tried to incorporate some of the ideas of that conference into ideas of affirmative action in Colombia. Nevertheless, it hasn't resulted in huge transformation of people's citizenship. Holston talks about communities in Brazil that have demanded rights and made legal new processes to access resources, and therefore have rethought citizenship. And he calls that insurgent citizenship, meaning that the communities have demanded to be recognized by the state and seen as people deserving the kind of services and rights that other citizens have. And when he was writing about Brazil, he sees cities as very important to this process. But one of the things that struck me about Colombia is that rural communities claiming territory have also, they've gained political rights, they've created new political constituents, they've used the law as an organizing tool, and in the process they've created a new sphere of participation and achieved broader rights than their original claim. So originally they're claiming land, and they've gone much further than that with the original claim. So I think rural Afro-Colombian social movements have struggled for recognition and territory and autonomy that really indicates this idea of insurgent citizenship that Holston talks about is not only found in cities, but also in rural areas. So the paper that I'm presenting today, it looks at Afro-Colombian struggles for citizenship and the way they've been transformed or created new spaces for equality. And I want to suggest that the practices and claims of Afro-Colombians and Afro-Latin Americans more generally challenge what it means to be a citizen in Latin America. And in the process, race and ethnicity are mobilized in new ways to broaden inclusion and to demand equality. However, historical ideas and categories regarding Afro-Colombians and Afro-Latin Americans in general limit the sort of transformation of this citizenship. And in particular, the sort of way of thinking of Afro-Latin Americans as diasporic people, so people who have come from elsewhere and, in a sense, whose culture and themselves have come from elsewhere, that affects quite a lot. So it sort of puts Afro-Latin Americans in a fragile position in relation to law.
Hey!